You've got to come back with me. Back to the future.
How many of us who watched Back to the Future when we were kids were tricked into thinking that 2015 would be a world of flying cars, power lacing shoes, and hoverboards? We know we were. That movie and others set in the future, which is now today, set the bar super high for what the glorious millennium could have been. Now that our expectations have been lowered way down, we wanted to take a look at some of the other movies set in and or around the year 2020 and check out what they got right and what they got so wrong. Don't worry, it's not all disappointing. We are seriously grateful that some of the more post-apocalyptic visions of today didn't come true after all. Well, yet.
I'll be back.
One of the most obvious things that movies set in the future love to speculate on is, without a doubt, technology. And hey, if you told us back in 1990 that we would each carry around a tiny computer in our pocket that would not only have access to the internet, but could also video chat with any of our friends and record and edit video and do all of the other amazing things our so-called phones do for us on a daily basis, we would have said, what's the internet? It's true that technology has advanced in unbelievable ways in the last 30 years, but we're all just so used to it, we don't really notice anymore. And yet, there's one thing that everyone thought we would have by now that we are definitely missing out on: flying cars. Just like the Back to the Future hoverboard, flying cars are the number one thing that every science fiction movie predicted we'd have by now, so where are they? One of the most famous science fiction movies of all time is definitely Blade Runner, which came out in 1982 and continues to amaze audiences everywhere to this day. When you watch Blade Runner, it's easy to forget that the distant future it's set in is actually 2019. Blade Runner was one of the first times we saw flying cars zooming around on a movie screen. And on top of that, it also features a ton of super advanced technology that didn't quite come true. Not only did they imagine that 2019 would be filled with synthetic humans walking around among us, they also imagined that we would have made a much larger head start colonizing space. They're not the only ones who thought so either.
Surprise.
Humans have been a little obsessed with the idea of building colonies on Mars and the Moon, and honestly, we're not really sure why. We've seen pictures of the moon, and let's be real here, why would we want to live inside a dome on an ice-cold rock with no atmosphere? Isn't it easier just to take care of the lush and oxygen-filled planet we currently reside on? Anyway, for whatever reason, people have been predicting that we would be settling in all over distant planets for a long time now, and while there are plans to send some humans to Mars in the soonish future, it hasn't quite happened yet. And yet, movies like Mission to Mars and The Space Between Us imagined a 2020 in which people were not only able to land on Mars, but start colonizing it as well. Along with exploring the distant corners of our solar system, people have always loved the idea of time travel and have held on to the hope that someday someone will give us the ability to visit the past and change our futures. In a movie called See You Yesterday, two young teenagers in the year 2020 actually find a way to go back in time, just like Doc Brown did all the way back in 1985.
Do you know what this means?
While flying cars and robots that look like humans might not be such a far-off idea, it seems like time travel is going to be one of those sci-fi ideas that are nowhere near actually coming across anytime soon. Another sci-fi favorite that we do have, however, is artificial intelligence. As our technology has continued to get smarter and smarter, tons of movies have come out that imagine just what might happen when it gets a little too smart. Even though we now have Siri and Alexa who listen to us and are able to obey commands, sci-fi movie makers have long since been wary of the idea of giving technology the ability to think for itself.
I hope the two of you are not concerned about this.
Think all the way back to HAL, the computer, in Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, and how HAL didn't quite behave the way that the scientists who created him thought he would. Other movies, like 2014's Transcendence, imagined a 2020 in which a human consciousness, in the form of a man named Will, could actually be uploaded into a computer and allow the person to keep living after their body had expired. It didn't seem like such a bad idea, until Will asked to be connected to the internet. Pretty quickly, things took a turn for the out of control, and like most random AI movies, did not work out very well for the humans in the end.
I'll kill you!
While we might sometimes be disappointed that we don't live on the moon or fly to and from the grocery store, more often than not, the future, or the now, that sci-fi movies predict is actually a whole lot darker than what we have today. An overwhelming majority of the movies set in this part of the 21st century predicted that we'd all be living in a post-apocalyptic wasteland by now, overrun by robots or aliens, or completely devastated by the effects of climate change. While it was only made a couple of years ago, A Quiet Place was set in the year 2020, and we are particularly grateful not to be living in that reality, thank you very much. Over the course of a year, almost all of Earth's population of humans and animals were devastated by a race of sightless extraterrestrials, leaving anyone left behind left to survive in almost total silence. The movie was a massive hit, and the scene where Emily Blunt tries to silently give birth while being stalked by one of the aliens is pretty much burned into our memories for good. But it turns out that Emily Blunt surviving an alien attack in post-apocalyptic 2020 is starting to become our own genre, as Edge of Tomorrow tackled the same subject matter in a totally different way. In this version, aliens invaded in 2015, and by 2020, the world is completely at war with them. It's a whole lot more bloody and action-packed than A Quiet Place, but still remains a version of 2020 that we are more than happy not to live in. One of the most popular ways that sci-fi writers and filmmakers have imagined our future is one that is completely overrun with robots. These movies attempt to show us the worst-case scenario of what would happen if we allowed technology to have too much power and control. The Terminator franchise became one of the most action-packed movie series on the planet based on this premise, and the most recent, Terminator Dark Fate, was set in, you guessed it, 2020. While it's also set in 1998 and 2042, but the main villain, the Rev 9 Terminator, originates from the year 2020. Building robots to be the ultimate fighting machines and making them indistinguishable from human beings is just a terrible combination of ideas, and we agree with these movies that the whole thing can really only lead to disaster. The movie does get one thing right, however, when they touch on the topic of human workers being replaced by machines in the auto industry. While it doesn't quite look as futuristic as it does in the movie, that is a real thing that has started to happen in factories across the world. Another movie in the genre of robots living among us is Real Steel. But fortunately for the residents of this 2020, the action is pretty much centered around the fact that robots have replaced humans in the sport of boxing. And then of course there's Pacific Rim. In this extremely frightening version of today, the robots have actually been built up to help humanity fight giant sea monsters known as the kaiju, who have emerged from a portal at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Leave it to Guillermo del Toro to find something scarier than a horde of emotional robots. Here's hoping we don't see the emergence of any interdimensional portals anytime soon, or if so, that they led somewhere a little more fun than the land of the massive sea monsters. Sometimes these post-apocalyptic versions of the future are not quite as fantastical and larger than life as an alien invasion or robo-apocalypse. In some stories, the most frightening thing about our future is, well, people. And that's where movies like Soylent Green come in. If you haven't heard the story or seen the 1973 sci-fi classic, then get ready, because we are about to spoil the ending for you. Soylent Green tells the story of an Earth that has succumbed to overpopulation, pollution, and climate change. Of course, only the richest people in society can afford clean water and food, and everyone else is forced to subside on a mysterious substance called Soylent Green. Well, it turns out that the key ingredient in Soylent Green is, well, we'll let Charlton Heston take it from here.
Soylent Green is made out of people.
Soylent Green is just one of the many types of dystopian movies that speculate on just how bad things can get if some of our very real problems get completely out of control. And they often reflect the fact that it will be all of the regular people who wind up in these uncomfortable conditions while the super rich live on relatively undisturbed.
Get out. Get out! Yo!
But these aren't the only movies out there. Some use sci-fi to go another, much happier direction. Science fiction has always been a way for people to express their anxieties over what the future holds for humankind on Earth, which is why so many of these movies predicted that we would be living in pretty dire conditions by the time we made it to 2020, but it's not all bad. And it doesn't have to be. Sometimes movies come along like Arrival, which questions whether or not all extraterrestrials will be out to get us. Instead, it offers the possibility that we could actually find a way to peacefully coexist. Or take Spike Jonze's Her. In it, we see Theodore, who develops a romance with an operating system, Samantha. Sure, the idea sounds a little creepy or off-putting at first, but over the course of the movie, it proves to be a real love story that actually helps Theodore to move on from his ex-wife. These movies, and others like them, might have predicted a version of the 2020s that hasn't exactly come to pass, but they find ways to give us a bit more hope about what our future could be like. Then again, we're still waiting for our hoverboards, and no, not the ones with two wheels that everyone has these days. We're talking real hoverboards. Oh, and we'll take a flying car or two while we're at it. What do you think about these movies set in 2020? Did they get anything right? Or are they totally off base? Did we miss your favorite movie that's set today? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Screen Rant to keep up with all of our latest videos. See ya!